I want to talk about the 9 Lives of Vince McMahon, the recent Vice documentary that came out discussing really exactly what the title says, the 9 Lives of Vince McMahon, all the different scandals he's been involved with all these years, and finally in 2022 he has finally chosen to retire. There are rumors he wants back in. There's been talk about that, but as of right now, 2022 will be remembered as far as in the scope of the history of wrestling as the year that Vince McMahon stepped down as not only the head of creative, but as the pretty much the guy in charge of the whole company and the direction it goes. So that's big because this dude's been in charge of WWE. He bought it in 1982 from his father, and all that is covered here in this documentary. And that's, 1982, 2022. That's 40 years. That is 40 years this man has been in control. And even before that, his father and grandfather, of course, were a dynasty in the business. Now, I was looking forward to this for quite some time because I was wondering what they were going to give away, what they were going to explain when it came to the individual scandals. Because we know that earlier this year, multiple women, not just one, multiple women were they sort of said it off the record, but kind of on the record that, Vince had paid them for sexual favors. Well, no, he kind of paid them for sexual favors, but he also paid them to not say anything. It's a two-way street, or it's not two-way street. It's two different reasons, two different situations. So the documentary does not really touch that until the very, very end. I gotta be honest, this was a bit of a disappointment, and I'm gonna tell you why. Because this documentary was basically a clip show composed of different segments of Dark Side of the Ring. Now, if you've never seen Dark Side of the Ring and you want to know the Vince McMahon story, this is a good way to watch it. But if you've seen Dark Side of the Ring, a lot of the segments are on repeat. It covers things from, him taking over the territory. Then it goes into the steroid scandal and some of the sex scandals, the alleged, things he would do in the back, to the Dr. D and John Stossel situation, going all the way through to the Attitude Era and the controversy behind that, and the screw job, and even things after that. The thing is that if you're a fan of wrestling, you're going to notice that some of the editing is a little bit weird and a little bit wonky. For example, in one segment, they discussed the Monday Night War, and they discussed how WWF at the time was having these cartoon characters on, while WCW provided a more realistic, gritty wrestling, and they showed Papa Shango. And that's very incorrect, because Papa Shango in 95 had already been repackaged as Kama the Supreme Fighting Machine. He wasn't even Papa Shango anymore. So things like that bugged me, being a hardcore wrestling fan. And I think that if they had a wrestling fan in there who was a bit more in tune with what was what, more of a historian, as even like a co-editor, just like a co-editor, those kind of little things probably wouldn't have happened. Because let me tell you, 95 was the year of characters like Mantar and the Goon and all these goofy characters that were big, slow galooks and didn't really they weren't athletic like WCW guys. But they cover all that stuff, and basically, you've got a huge hodgepodge of different people, from the wrestling media to people who worked alongside of Vince McMahon. You've got Jim Cornette's on here, Vince Russo is on here. He has a lot to say too, and I know a lot of folks have recognized Russo as being kind of a liar, and he's been kind of having that reputation. Very controversial figure in wrestling. He is one of the few guys that worked right along with Vince McMahon for about 3 years. So he knows what the man thinks like. He knows what the man wants, at least in those days. So he's a good person to interview. Alongside them, you've got people like Brian Alvarez and Dave Meltzer from the Wrestling Observer. You've got Wade Keller from the Pro Wrestling Torch. You've got other wrestlers, too, of course, that worked with him. Interview clips with Bret Hart and Dr. D. David Schultz and several other people. The thing about the documentary is, ultimately, it is a clip show. If you have already seen Dark Side of the Ring, prepare to see the same segments over and over again you've seen. However, the last 20 minutes or so, I think, is pretty damn riveting. When you get past the Benoit tragedy and the Owen Hart death, when you get into the new stuff. That's where it gets interesting. And they actually did a pretty smart job. They traced Vince McMahon's big mistake all the way back to when he went public, with the idea being that once a company goes public and is traded on the New York Stock Exchange, once you have an IPO, an initial public offering, the company is in the hands of not only you, but also the shareholders. And unfortunately, when you have a private company and it goes public, that means the records of finance have to be public. That means that people have to know and have access to these documents. You can't just hide money and funnel it. It's very difficult to play those kinds of games when you are a publicly traded company. You're under their jurisdiction. So they kind of talk about how going public changed the entire perspective of the business and how they sort of went into more of a PG route due to like sponsors, in the mid 2000s and things of that nature. But really, the IPO is what led to the Wall Street Journal being able to attain these documents of Vince McMahon paying millions and millions of dollars. They even briefly discussed Vince and Linda's separation, because that's something that came out earlier this year that was kept a secret. Vince and Linda have been separated since 2012, and there were rumors of this going all the way back to then, because I remember after Linda ran for Senate, I think it was Senate, right? And she didn't win. I remember there was talk of, maybe they were going to get separated, but that wasn't the case. I mean, I didn't think it was the case. I thought maybe she just retired and just kind of lived her own life at home or whatever the case may be. But no, she and him, I guess, aren't. I mean, I don't know their private lives, but based on the documentary and other things that we've heard, yeah, they're separated. So Vince, but they're still married. So Vince, maybe thought he can get away with more things. But the point is that, and this is the kind of the moral of the documentary, there's two main things to take away from this documentary. Two main learning points. A, if you've got money, you can get away with a lot of things. A lot of things. You can commit crimes and get away with them. And we've seen people like Jeffrey Epstein or R. Kelly, multiple people throughout history getting away with crimes because of how much money they had. And having these O.J. Simpson, having these lawyers that you can hire that know the system so well they can find holes in it. Good legal counsel, man, is going to cost you six figures. Point blank, end of story. And regular folks don't have six figures lying around to spend on lawyers. But if you're rich, you can get away with stuff. That's part one. Part two is, if you are wealthy and you have a paper trail, at some point you can get caught, especially if your company is public. And that's the lesson to be learned, is that, this guy Vince was paying multiple women that give him sexual favors. If it was just one, he may have been able to keep it under the rug for a longer time, but this was seriously, a serious thing. And they even talk about how this has to be a real thing, because usually WWE's legal team would handle this. But the fact that Vince voluntarily stepped down after more and more, scandals came out, it was almost like he said, you know what? Enough is enough. I'm not going to beat this. It's like he almost knew, or maybe he talked to his attorneys and they told him, look, you're done, dude. And maybe they had a family meeting, and that's what led to him sort of stepping down, which is really, still, I'm still kind of in shock. It's been this way for about 6 months, and I'm still in shock that the company does not have Vince anymore. And they even discuss how it's gotten better financially and creatively since Vince left. So maybe Vince was a problem. But ultimately, I did enjoy the very beginning and the very end of the documentary. Going into Vince's childhood and how apparently he was sexually assaulted. Stuff I didn't even know about. This was good stuff. I wanted more of that and not just the clip show that was Dark Side of the Ring. But it was cool because, I don't mind seeing the same story again. I don't mind that, but I know some people might mind that. So just be prepared that the entire middle chunk of this thing is, stuff we've already seen. Anyways, that's my review of the Vice documentary. There's going to be another one supposedly coming out on Netflix where Vince was involved in it, but I do not know when that is. So it is what it is. Take care of yourself. Let me know what you thought about the 9 Lives of Vince McMahon, and I'll talk to y'all soon.